When our ancestors discovered this star system hidden away within a colossal nebula, I don't think they knew for sure how long they would escape detection. Imagine, after escaping slavery, after suffering near genocide, fleeing through war and anarchy, after suffering at the hands of warlords and bandits, nursing their hyperdrives and stretching their food supplies and life support beyond the limits. Finally, they found a place of refuge, a place to call home, to settle and start rebuilding, but constantly watching the skies, looking over their shoulders. So they gave us a few centuries of peace. But they say all good things come to an end. I was born in the middle of the occupation. We lived far out on the main belt, in an orbit 32 light minutes beyond Lumina, between the great rocks of Ferric and Distra 3. My parents tried to shelter me from the worst of it, but economic conditions tightened as I grew up. The Elysian naval forces became more and more intrusive, demanding taxes, attempting to enlist teenagers, setting up checkpoints and internment camps on the larger roids. Anger was the air we breathed. Despair was part of the cocktail. But I think we all dreamed of fighting back. Around the great gas giant of Lumina orbit 18 moons or more. The greatest of these are Lumina, Caldera, and Freyja. I'd never visited Verdanta back then, but everyone who had raved about the open spaces, the greenery, and most of all the oceans. Personally, I couldn't stand the thought of walking around with no suit, under an open sky, with no life support equipment, and all those wild airborne bacteria and viruses. Way too risky, I thought. And besides, I had no time for that. We had to fight the occupation. We never had warships or armaments like the Elysians did, though. They dominated. There were plenty of rumors of the Verdanta Liberation Front making lightning attacks, planting bombs, that sort of thing. But the Elysians would just send in their crack regiment, the Vermilions, supposedly named by the first Elysian governor as a kind of joke. By the time the Verm were finished, the innocent Reuters were either dead, in hiding, or in one of the Elysians' camps. And the VLF? They were usually one step ahead and banished into the big black. If they got too bold, they got dead all of a sudden. We heard a lot about the Elysians' main method of imprisoning our people. This was a huge city they built, under the shallow seafloor of Verdanta. The planet's inhabitants had been rounded up and sent there decades ago, all of them. Well, almost. Supposedly, the Elysians' aim was to keep the planet's surface in an unspoiled condition. But stories of Elysian nobles flying in from the Imperial core worlds, especially for aerial hunting trips, told us all we needed to know. Anyway, my story really begins one day when I was working as a mining tech, repairing a rock rig, a profession I'd been in for several years. I met this man named Joshua, a traveler, leading a ragtag band of misfits around, talking to whoever would listen about his idea for a better life, a better world, something like that. I had listened in a couple of times on the way back from work, and chatted to him one evening. He was intriguing, good-hearted, but hard to get a grasp on. I couldn't hold his gaze for long. He seemed to look inside me, but not in an intrusive way, just like, I don't know, like he knew me, like he'd known me for a long time. The next day he walked into the workshop and told me to follow him. I found myself laying down my welder and taking my leave of my work partner. Joshua, or Commander Joshua as people called him, was like nobody else I'd ever met. I saw him do things which should have been impossible. But the most surprising part was how the dregs of Reuter society wanted to follow him, They changed. Seems they left their old ways behind. As time went on, I realized that despite his abilities, he wasn't interested in resisting the Verm. Taking down the Elysians didn't seem like his concern. This frustrated me. It was all I could think about. So one day, I met an old friend who confided that he'd joined the VLF as a quartermaster, said they needed techs like me. So in short, I decided to join the VLF, but I couldn't bear to leave Joshua behind at first. I stayed in his merry band for a while longer, while messaging back and forth with the VLF cell group. Uh, it's hard to recount how I betrayed Joshua and his followers. We had evaded the Elysian blockade and landed on Verdanta, camping in the wilderness. Joshua tried to teach us new things, but I couldn't grasp it. I was too distracted. I knew the VLF were planning a raid on an Elysian command post, some 40k from there. I monitored the VLF channel. Things went wrong. The Verm pursued the survivors of the VLF squad who called me for help. What could I do? I was torn. Among the VLF squad were several key operatives and a close friend. I found myself baiting the Verm with my radio, broadcasting on their channel. I hid the radio in my tent and fled, shouted at everyone to run, and I joined up with the VLF survivors. It worked. It worked too well. Josh's band was arrested, some murdered, some tortured, some imprisoned. A few escaped. I think Joshua himself was a captive for a while. I never learned the whole story. I will, I will carry that guilt with me for as long as I live. But I continued somehow to train with the VLF and began mounting operations against the occupation forces. Many of them failed miserably. I barely escaped with my life a few times. Then I formed my own cell group and began to get results. Limpet mines, snipers, camouflage, and most of all good intel through thorough preparation. I reluctantly took on Valone, the young son of my close friend from Gibra Rock. His enthusiasm and sense of humor lit up the dark places, but I had a feeling it would end badly. Then the VLF captain over me sent us off on a stupid raid against a civilian station. I told him we had to attack the unmanned industrial section of the station, but at the last minute he ordered us to plant our explosives on the civilian section. From there the op went into a spin rapidly. They seemed to know that we were coming. They were lying in wait. A drone took out Valone. I saw him die. There was nothing I could have done, really. I see that now, but seeing his burned body spinning away into space crippled something inside of me. The Verm are known for their ruthlessness. They usually take no prisoners. But this time it was a mystery. They used nerve disruptor rifles. Perhaps they had orders to capture some VLF specimens. They got me. I couldn't bring myself to detonate the device and kill all those people, those innocent Verdantans. After the usual brutal treatment, the Verm passed me on to their civilian scientific contractors in the low orbit station. My memory is blurry at this point. I only know they had me in a lab, poking and injecting, for several weeks. I don't know what drugs they had on me or what they did to me. What I next clearly remember is being thrown into an execution cell and told that that was it. I had 2 hours to live. The Verm who provide security for ROS have developed and refined the most painful methods of interrogation and execution anyone could imagine. The electrocution would apparently take many minutes before I lost consciousness and lost my life. I think they expected me to panic and beg for mercy, but I determined not to give them that last pleasure and instead traded insults with the Verm guard. The minutes ticked by. When the guard's shift changed, suddenly there stood someone I knew all too well. It was Commander Joshua. It was a shock at first, but I wasn't too surprised that he'd been able to find a way in. Or perhaps he'd been a prisoner all along and had just walked free. He didn't say. He confronted me, gently bringing up my past. I couldn't hide from him. I freely confessed my betrayal and my wasted life of violence. But then I never expected this, although knowing Joshua like I did, it shouldn't have been a surprise, but he forgave me completely. That cut me deeply. I felt like I was a new creature, fresh out of the womb. The burden was lifted. Not only that, but he gave me a task. He told me to take a data disk to his people, his reformed group, who remained in hiding on Verdanta. It seemed important to him, so I agreed. But then he refused to come with me. Instead, he waited for the next shift of guards and gave himself up. I was frantic for him to come with me, but determined not to get caught again. So I left him to his fate. I let him down again. Then began a strange journey through the underworld of the ROS station. I knew the approximate layout. We'd planned ops against ROS, but never carried them out. Now I knew how to get to the hangar bay and managed to steal a Verm suit. Perfect disguise. As I was attempting to enter the bay, up on a screen came a live broadcast from the prison facility. With a sinking sense of dread, I saw that they were going to execute Commander Joshua in my place, proclaiming him to be a notorious terrorist leader. It would be difficult to get further from the truth than that. But there was nothing I could do. I had to watch him suffer the most excruciating death, the death that I had so narrowly missed. And he knew exactly what he was doing. He set me free. I, who had betrayed him and got many of his followers killed, and distracted the guards for long enough that I could escape. So I swallowed all that and escaped. It wasn't too hard. They sent a drone after me, of course, and it seemed like I had no chance, but stranger and stranger. Was it the ROS experimentation? Somehow I was able to reach into the drone's circuitry with my mind and cause an overload. Then all I had to do was to navigate to the overground base in a stolen ROS pod that had some serious mechanical issues. The hangar tech did try to warn me. Anyway, I made it to the ground alive and salvaged what I could of the wreck. Turns out I had landed on the wrong side of the planet. I'd have to trek all the way around Verdanta to reach the overground base. I was so intent on putting together a scrap-built plane that I almost missed the Carver drone that tracked me down. It didn't seem to spot me, so in the morning I named my plane Canary and took off. The drone picked up my scent, and I spent half the day trying to throw it off. I thought I'd succeeded, and flew off to the south. It was a long flight. I planned to fly over the South Pole, where I knew for a fact that Verm patrols were very rare. But hours of flying a scratch-built plane with almost no instrumentation wore me out, and I almost crashed into some kind of ruined mining facility. I decided to land while I could still keep my eyes open, but Canary wasn't built for landings. The skids splintered off. I lost control. I thought it was all over. It was a close call. Battered, exhausted, I found some stale food and a place to sleep. In the morning, I began repairs. Canary was my only hope of reaching the overground people. And where else could I go? The VLF had let me down. It smelled a lot like betrayal. I finally realized that armed revolt against the Elysians simply wasn't going to lead to success in the end. They were too powerful. We could fight them for 1,000 years and still be under their thumb. I was thinking through all this and wondering who exactly had betrayed my VLF team to the Verm. When I came across a mining tunnel, I never imagined there was anybody living there until it was too late. They were fugitives. I'd heard rumors of such people, somehow evading Verm patrols, living off the land, living like rats in the ruins. But here they were, Reth and Alice, both sure at first that I was a Verm scout and determined not to let me report them. So I had to convince them that I was on their side and began telling my story. But their dog, Lumina, turned out to be an even bigger surprise than they were. Since then, I'd learned that the old-time Verdantans weren't primitive at all. Their scientific research lived on, especially the biological and gene splicing branches. Someone before the occupation had uplifted an ordinary dog or wolf with the use of selected human DNA and created an intelligent talking canine. They had bred and flourished. Lumina was one of these. But he was still an aggressive pack animal at heart, I think. He almost tore my throat out, and in the chaos, Alice pulled the trigger. All I got was a nasty bruise, thanks to the Verm armor. Lumina also had a keen sense of hearing and smell, and I could feel it too, somehow, a drone above ground. It was the same one that had tracked me. It was scrap it or die trying. I scrapped it. Finally, Alice knew I was a friend, not foe, and I got my first decent meal in a while. We parted on good terms. They were heading north, away from the winter. I continued south, towards the southern continent of Volcanica. I'd heard some odd stories about that place.